Sincerely.
Once again, it's your host, Gabe Morales, with Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians. Today, we have a very special guest. I'm very honored to have him on the show. I've known him for many years now. He has 50 years plus experience in law enforcement and corrections, as well as working with federal agencies. He retired as assistant director in the California Department of Corrections, where I also worked. He basically oversaw the special services unit as well as the parolees at large unit. We both have trained across the country. I believe I first met him via the National Major Gang Task Force. I saw him instruct one time, and man, I was really, really impressed. And I even know about him even before I met him. He was a legend in the California Department of Corrections, I tell you, at Folsom. One thing I like about Brian is he never forgot where he came from. I've told him that before, and I'll say it again. He really treats everybody well, from the janitor all the way up to the executive. And that's one thing I got to say that I really like about this man. Like I said, we have taught together at conferences. In fact, here's a picture of one of the conferences where we taught at. And here's Mr. Tony, the real Pac-Man Moreno, with myself and Paco Marcel, who's a mutual friend of ours, also a very well-respected individual. And then we have Brian. And then Chuck Scoville, rest in peace. Chuck brought us out to the first Arizona Gang Investigators Association conference, I believe. And then to the far right there is Ken Lucas, Arizona Corrections. So that's one of my favorite pictures there. I just had to show everybody that one there because I'm really proud of it to be associated with these great men. Brian has published several books, which we'll talk about here shortly. And so, yeah, let's get into the show. How are you today, sir?
Gabe, I'm doing fine, and thanks for all those kind words, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And I have tremendous respect for you. You've started at the bottom, and you have always extended your hand to people. Sometimes even when they didn't treat you well. You're a trainer, you're a writer, you're an author. You've done it all. I admire your energy and your desire to continue to be in this business and share what you know. And we're all better off for that. So kudos to you, Gabe.
Well, thank you, sir. I try to do my little part. I appreciate that. Can you tell us, Brian, where were you born and where were you raised?
Well, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I was there till about 4 or 5 years old. And then my father, like many veterans, left. My father was a New Yorker, man. I mean, a New Yorker from the day he died. He moved us to Long Island, and then he commuted into the city his entire work career, 40, 50 years. But he was a diehard New Yorker, talked like it, and loved that city. I'm so glad he was never around when 9/11 occurred.
Mm.
That would have broke my father's heart. But anyway, so I grew up on Long Island. One of the things I think you wanted to ask me about were the gangs. We had lightweight gangs. We didn't have New York City type gangs. We were all transplants from New York City. I remember the Impalas, the Elites, and there was a couple other gangs. And there wasn't a lot of fighting among gangs. When there was fighting, there were no firearms, there were no guns. Maybe a zip gun would show up now and then, but everybody fought with fists. So I didn't really grow up around gangs. There was gang mentality, and a number of kids that I grew up with ended up in jail. In fact, our high school was right across the street from the Nassau County Jail. We could hear the inmates out on the yard. So if there was ever a time that you wanted to get yourself in trouble, they'd say, "Hey, you're going to end up across the street." So, I could cross over to different groups and not get myself in trouble.
Learned how to communicate early on.
Big time, big time. And as you know it, communication is the key to this business. It's a key for us, and it's a key for the gangs. Their ability to communicate keeps them in business.
Well, thank you. I didn't know that you were originally from New York. I always assumed you were from California. So that's very interesting. What did you do then after high school? Did you go to high school in New York?
Yeah, I went to high school in New York, and I never wanted to go to college. I wasn't college material. Yeah, I had an older sister, 2 years older. She was in a New York State Teachers College. I had a younger brother, and I was the middle child, and I was a Teamster, and I was driving forklifts, earning Teamster money. And my dad never went to college. He said, I want all my kids to at least try college. And I said, Dad, I'm not college material. I don't want to go to college. And he said, do it for me. I said, okay. I said, but I'm leaving a Teamster job and I'm making good money, and I'll probably make better money as a Teamster, a little short sighted on my side. I did. I said, I'll do it for you, Dad. I loved and respected my father up until this day. He made me the man I am today. A little story about him, and then we'll get back. Out of high school, he was drafted by the Cleveland Indians baseball team,
Wow.
and he went to spring training. I don't know if you remember the rifleman, Chuck Connors.
Yes. Mm.
He played first base. My dad was the second baseman. My dad got drafted. He went there, but then he had to come home. His father had died, so he had to take care of my grandmother. And then, of course, when the war started, he joined. He was a sergeant, Bronze Star, just a great guy. So I didn't want to go to college. I said, okay, Dad, I'll do it.
Mm.
And I did much better in college, and I actually liked it. Actually, when my junior year in college, I did a semester working inside a county jail, a Montgomery County Sheriff's Department's jail. And also, I visited all these state prisons, and I got kind of hooked. I got, hooked on the excitement. And I realized at that point in time, I wanted to do something in law enforcement. A lot of people said, I went into this to help people. Well, I wish that was my ulterior motive, but I went into it for excitement.
Okay.
I was kind of an adrenaline junkie as a kid and wasn't afraid to try, try anything. So, yeah, I wanted to help people. Sure, I did. But I really was looking for excitement. And LAPD had come to our campus. And I said, I'm going to California. As soon as I graduated, my wife and I both had jobs. We quit our jobs. We put everything we owned into the car and drove to California.
What year
Got
was
there.
this?
So, we ended up getting jobs while I applied to police and corrections jobs. I really wanted to be with LAPD. I scored 85, 85, 87, something like that on the test and passed everything else. So I thought, hey, I asked, hey, when am I going to the academy? I'm earning $2.50 an hour, or we can hardly pay the rent. And they said, with an 87, it'll be a year and a half, maybe 2 years. I said, what are you talking? I wasn't a veteran, and veterans in those days got 10 points. So he said, the guys that scored 87 now are 97. The average academy class was in the high 90s. So he said, it's going to be a while, so don't quit your day job. And then I got corrections called me. And on the same day, I got hired by the institutions division at Chino State Prison and by the parole division in Los Angeles. So I opted to go to the parole division. So in January of 1972, I started my career as a parole agent in Los Angeles, in East Los Angeles, home of the Mexican Mafia, home of Matavia, all the different gangs. It was an incredible place to start, Gabe. Let me tell you.
I was
I
just
mean,
going to
I
ask,
was
how was it like back in those days?
well. First of all, heroin was king. PCP hadn't hit yet, but it was on its way. A lot of young Hispanic gang members were starting to experiment with PCP, but heroin was, that was it. We had more heroin addicts in East Los Angeles than anybody else except Harlem. So heroin was king. The Mexican mafia, owned East Los Angeles. A lot of shootings. At that time, Hispanic gangs were shooting one another. These kids were shooting one another left and right. We were right on Whittier Boulevard, in between a couple of, Montevilla. I could hit Montevilla with a rock. Other gangs were all around us. And then we had a bunch of Mexican mafia guys assigned to the East LA office. Kind of cut my teeth on gangs real early. And then, and a lot of people don't know, there were a lot of NF in Los Angeles. The Aranda brothers, John Juan Valdez, and others. So we had them at that office too. So it was rocking and rolling.
Yeah.
And then for one short period of time, the parole agent who supervised Joe Morgan got sick. So we divided up his caseload. I had Morgan for a while. He was a pretty big guy and, well muscled. He had a wooden leg. But he'd come to the office in like a full length 211 jacket all the way down. And every time he came in, you're wondering who's getting shot today.
So for our viewers, I know a lot of our regular viewers know who the Mexican Mafia is and who Joe Morgan is. The Mexican Mafia doesn't have a rank or a constitution per se. However, if they did have a godfather, it would have been probably Joe Morgan. He was very well respected type of individual. What Brian is talking about is if there was a number one guy, this guy would be it, Joe Morgan. So he was in American Me, if any of you saw that. He was the character played by William Forsythe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Joe Morgan, in our belief, was the leader. So there were still other influential people, but I think he commanded the leadership. So that's kind of where I started my career in East LA. And then I went to the Long Beach office for a very short period of time and insane Crips, rolling 20s, and some ABs. And then I went to South Central Los Angeles which there was no other place like South Central Los Angeles.
What year are we
Crips,
talking about here, Brian?
1976, maybe 77.
So the Crips and
Uh,
Bloods were really taking off at that time.
yeah, initially in the early 70s, there were maybe four Crip sets, but by the mid 70s, every street corner had their own Crip set and Bloods, and they were shooting one another daily. Okay, it was a crazy busy. My partner and I were given the 100 parolees most likely to commit a violent offense. So we had black street gang members, we had Hispanic street gang members, we had mafia, we had black guerrilla family, and we didn't have very many whites in there. I spent 10 years, on a caseload. And then I wanted to get into the special service unit. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, it was kind of like a police unit within corrections. And you left the parole agent series and went to the special agent series. And there's nothing special about us. It was just a name. But you were allowed to work any parolee or any inmate in the system. And I interviewed 5 times. And on the fifth time, they finally gave it to me. And I was happy because, I found a place. I really gelled while I was there. And then I spent another 14 years in East LA and South Central working for SSU. I had a couple of lightweight threats. And, most of the time it's during the course of an interchange, but once the cuffs were on and the dust settled, it was, I never took them very seriously. I had one or two that I did. I a threat from the Aryan Brotherhood. And later on in my career, I had a threat from the mafia. But I got threatened by the 8 Trey Gangster Crips. They were the ones that kicked off the 1992 LA riot. So I was part of an LAPD FBI task force. I was corrections representative. 14 agencies under one roof, working violent crimes committed during the riot. And I learned a lot, but I also arrested a lot of 8 Trey Gangster Crips. So I got threatened. I was teamed up with an LAPD guy, and he was threatened. And they ended up shooting up his mother's house.
Mm.
And then one of the OGs sent a letter out and said, "Hey, I'm tired of seeing this guy at parole hearings and seeing this guy in court. Take him out. And if you can't get him, get his family." Now, that's the difference between prison gangs and street gangs. Prison gangs, it was all business. As long as you didn't disrespect them and tear up their mom's house, I'm the bad guy, you're the good guy, this is business. If I got to do time, I got to do time. Street gangs were different, impulsive. The letter came out, whacked a guy, and sure enough, they came to the house to get us. And that was it. They didn't get us, but I said, that's it. We got to move. Now, I've got 25 years in Los Angeles, right? I love the place. Most people hate Los Angeles. I loved LA, just loved it. City of Angels. But I knew I had to leave. And so I took the battlefield promotion. You know, I hadn't worn hard sole shoes in 20 years. And all of a sudden I'm in a suit every day. I get to headquarters and let me tell you something about headquarters in CDC. There are so many ambitious people there. You need a stab proof vest on because people are always looking to take you down. CDC ate their own for sport. That was a tough survival. That's one of my accomplishments. I survived headquarters. First, I went in as the chief of investigations in charge of all departmental investigations, officer involved shootings, whatever, internal affairs, everything. And then I got appointed to the assistant director's job, which at this point in time I wanted because Gabe, I said, if I got to leave Los Angeles and my dream job, and I got to go up here to headquarters and wear a suit every day and hard sole shoes, I'm going as high as I can get. What happens when you take one of those executive jobs is you leave the civil service system. But I didn't realize if they didn't want you anymore, or if stepped in your own mess kit, they could send you back to your old civil service rank. Well, when Gray Davis got elected as the first Democratic governor in 16 years, I didn't realize it, but I had to submit my resignation letter, signed but not dated.
Pretty cutthroat, it sounds like.
Oh, man, absolutely. But, when I got comfortable being the boss, I got good at it. So I learned everything I could about every aspect of CDC. And at one time, towards the end of my career, I was the senior executive. I had the most years in headquarters. And the other thing I did was I learned policy. I became a policy wonk. Every weekend, I would bring home a part of the DOM, the Department's Operation Manual, and I'd read it on the weekend. It was 7 volumes at the time, 5-inch 3-ring binders. So I read all that stuff. So I knew what the policy was, whether you followed it or not. that's up to you. But if somebody come to me and said, hey, what's the policy on this? I'd say, hey, sometimes I'd have to look it up, but at least I knew where to look. That gave me value later on in my career. Well, I had cancer and I took 2 months off. When I went back into the director's office, I said, hey, I'm back, blah, blah, blah. And they said, okay, we want you to keep internal affairs. I said, I don't want internal affairs. I said, it's too stressful. Between you and me, I hated internal affairs. Is it important? Absolutely. You got to root out the bad cops, but you got to be fair. So they said, no, you're going to run internal affairs. We'll find somebody else to run SSU. Didn't sit well. I had 30 years in. I said, I'm out of here in 2 weeks. So I went back and I gave my letter. And I had my secretary hand deliver it up to the director's office. About 2 o'clock, they called me up there, said, hey, the director wants you up there in his office. And I went up there. He says, what's this all about? I said, hey, you know what? I told you that internal affairs was too stressful, and you didn't care about it. So you know what? You don't care about me. I don't care about you. I got 30 years in. I'll go do something else. And they said, no, 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 stay. You don't have to take IA. Take Elliott, take SSU back. The wrong answer, guys. You should have said that yesterday morning, not today. I'm leaving in 2 weeks. And I left. That was my CDC career. I wanted to go do something else. Mm-hmm. And as you know, work in gangs, that is a trait that other agencies want. I got hired by a bunch of other different agencies. Later on after that, I got hired by the FBI. I helped with a guy named Don Ledane, who was a former Metro DC gang sergeant. He retired after 20 plus years, spent almost another 20 with the Bureau. And he hired me to say, hey, let's stand up an intel unit. So we stood up a multi-agency unit. We had Bureau of Prisons, we had CDC, we had the FBI, and then it expanded to other state agencies. Clark County Jail, crime goes through Vegas. So we had the Clark County guys, part of it. It was a great place to work. I was there for 7 years. I did some work for the California AG's office, defending departments against lawsuits by gang members. And then my old FBI boss retired from the FBI and became the executive director of the local fusion center, the Central California Intelligence Center, which is a counterterrorism unit. So he called me, said, hey, what are you doing? I'm trying to learn how to retire and relax. And he said, hey, why don't you come to work for me? I said, oh, man, do you really need me? And he said, I just need you to do a couple of things. So I went to work for him. But, it really wasn't a good fit, Gabe. I was in a cubicle. I was kind of bored stiff. On my 71st birthday, I'm getting ready to go to work. And my wife comes in. She goes, you just don't seem to have the enthusiasm you used to have. And I said, honey, do the math. I started when I was 21. I'm 71 today, 50 years. I said, I've had enough. She goes, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to quit. She goes, when? I said, today. You're not quitting today. I said, oh, yeah, I am.
Today's as good as day as any other. Yeah, there you go.
And I went in there and finagled my way out of there. And the rest is, it was a great career. I loved it. Made a lot of friends, including you and others that are still in it. They're still in the game. They're still teaching people. They're still contributing. And so one of the things I thought is, how can I contribute, but on my own time? And part of it was writing. So I had written criminal justice articles. And actually, I was on the editorial board for the California Probation, Parole, and Correctional Officers Association. So I was on their editorial board. I wrote articles for them. And then I decided to write the book. I said, I got to get this gang book out of my system. And
we're talking about Eye of the Devil.
Eye of the Devil. So I said, working gangs for 40 plus years is like looking into the eye of the devil. So I wrote it, and of course, writing is not easy. It takes a lot of work and a lot of brain power. It got published by Police Fire Publishing. And then Bollinger, the publisher, said, hey, would you do the Nuestra Familia Encyclopedia? And he said, would you do it with Ramon Mendoza? Pete asked me to do it, and I've always had a sense of loyalty, people that took care of me. So we wrote the Nuestra Familia Encyclopedia. And then I said, you know what? I want to try fiction. So I wrote the book Hit List, Time to Die. And it was a lot of my parole officer experience in Los Angeles. I had the protagonist, main guy of the book, Matt Riley. He came from New York, raised in an orphanage, raised by Catholic nuns, and then he hooks up with Bobby Garcia, a guy born and raised in El Sereno. And so I wrote it, and I write it in the third person. And then a guy hooks on to me, I don't know why, a really neat guy, and he says, hey, I heard you wrote a book. And he said, one of the guys told me you wrote a book. Why didn't you tell me? I said, I don't know. I haven't even published it yet. And, he says, send it to me. So I send it to him. He reads it and he calls me back. He goes, hey, rewrite this in the first person. I'm like, are you kidding me? I got to rewrite you want the whole thing rewritten in the first person? He says, yeah. He says, it would be much better. And he convinces me. I rewrite it in the first person. And sure enough, he hooks me up with a publisher. And the publisher at first says, nah, we don't do these books. And I guess he read it and he called back and said, no, you know what? We'll publish it. Here I am with a fiction book. I kind of like now writing fiction. I'm working on a sequel now. And there's going to be some people kidnapped. There's going to be some
Yeah.
shooting and blood. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, that's good for you. I mean, the thing about we both written books, and the thing about when you write something that's nonfiction, you make one little mistake, or even a video, you make one little mistake, and people want to just throw it back in your face. Oh yeah, you messed up here. But with fiction, I can't see that happening because
no, you are exactly right. When you write a nonfiction book or you go up on YouTube or on a podcast, you expose yourself to criticism, whether it's justified or not. And when I got into it, it was like, oh man, you got to develop thick skin. And so fiction, I said, let's try a book, a fiction book, and what could people say?
right.
I didn't like it. All right, you didn't like it. You're not going to hurt my feelings. So that's kind of how I got into writing, and I wanted to salvage parts of my career because it was a great career, and that also helps me relive some of this stuff because I might be a 74-year-old guy, but sometimes I feel like I'm 24. And I wish I was 24. And my wife supports me. That's the most important thing. As you know, writing is a lonely experience. You sit in front of that keyboard, spending a lot of time in front of that keyboard.
Oh yeah, it's a lot harder than most people realize. Yeah, it's easy
Oh
to be
yeah,
a critic, but most of those people haven't wrote their own books, or they'd have a whole new attitude probably. Yeah. Well, thank you
absolutely.
very much for coming on the show once again, Brian. Man, you had a long career full of all kinds of different stories. I'm sure triumphs and headaches. Really appreciate you sharing that with us. And for some of you people maybe thinking about getting corrections, just like when Brian was out there looking for a job and I was looking for a job when we were young men, the corrections are looking for people. So if you want to know more about the business, check out Brian's books and see if it's for you. It's the right fit for you. It's not for everybody, that's for sure. So thank you, sir, for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Gabe. Thank you for the invite. Stay safe, stay healthy, keep doing what you're doing because you do a good job at it.
All
So,
right. All right, Brian. You
all right,
take
my
care.
friend.
Stay
All right,
healthy.
take care. Bye.